Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and this is Theater Resources Unlimited. It's our Friday community gathering, and it's it's January 6th. January 6th, the second year anniversary of the insurrection. We won't even go there. There's just so much going on in the world right now that is so ridiculous, including not having a Speaker of the House of Representatives. So much stupid stuff. Thank God we can meet and spend time together and talk about something sensible like theater that actually makes more sense than the world these days. So we've been doing this this is actually our 137th consecutive community gathering since April 17th, 2020. Originally, it was a response to COVID. It was my way of dealing with the fact that people couldn't get together live and I couldn't do any of my programs. So it's like, all right, let's try Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom was, but I tried Zoom, and Zoom has been working for us really well. And we're going to keep doing Zoom. We're going to keep using Zoom. Now that we're coming out of shutdown, I'm still going to basically depend on Zoom to bring together a community that is now global for us. We used to be pretty New York centric once upon a time. Now we've got people in the room from Malaysia and Australia and UK and all over the country. And that's a good thing. I'm not going to stop doing that. Conversations used to be about how hard it was to cope during COVID and deal with shutdown and all this stuff. And let me just say that we have emerged into a world with live performance and live eating out and live functions and people being outdoors and often unmasked. And sure enough, I got COVID. So I'm at the tail end of COVID, and COVID has a very long tail, apparently. So everybody still be careful. It's still out there, and it's not fun. Generally speaking, it's not dangerous or fatal. I mean, I'm here. I might cough a little today, but other than that, I think I'm doing pretty well. So our conversations are now dealing with the world as we used to know it, colored by the fact that we've sort of welcomed in a new world. So now we're dealing in a world of hybrid. We're dealing in a world where a lot of us are equally interested in live performance and also what we can do virtually and things that we can accomplish virtually. Today, we're going to really focus on the global part of what I keep talking about, the fact that we're global and theater is global, and theater's getting more and more global from what I hear from some of my guests today. They're going to talk about partnerships that are happening. We're used to knowing that things are going on in Australia and UK, and new things that I'm going to hear, I think we're going to learn today are things about the Saudi market, the Saudi Arabian market, and also I think we're going to hear a little bit about the Korean market. And I'm going to bring in my honored guests, my friends, and my guests, Chris Grady from UK, Neil Gooding from Australia, and Cody Lassen from US. However, where they're from has nothing to do with where they're working necessarily, or is only remotely related to where they're working and what they're participating in and doing these days. Cody, let's start with you. You're UK, US based. So tell us a little bit about your background. A lot of people know you already, but you can tell us, like for my viewing audience out there who doesn't necessarily know who you are. You got some good Broadway credits, and you're also working in other markets.
Yeah, I mean, to your point of kind of breaking down barriers and borders, I think the last time I saw Chris from the UK, we were in Korea, and the last time I saw Neil from Australia, we were in Los Angeles. No, actually, I saw you the other night in New York, Neil. That's right. In any case, we tend to see each other not in the cities we live and work somehow. Yeah, so I'm a producer, a commercial independent producer, work kind of equally on Broadway, off Broadway, regionally. About, gosh, 6 years ago, I started filming every show I do. Most of them have not been released for very different reasons. But I think the future of developing new works is both cross-border collaboration in terms of actual live in-person theater and streaming theater. I think the lines are, as much as the powers that be want to keep those silos there, the lines are starting to blur a little bit.
Okay, and that's a pretty good intro for you. And let's move to Chris Grady, who's in UK now. Chris, say hi.
Hi, very good to meet you all. And yes, absolutely, Cody and I were last in Korea. And I'm also thinking back to Broadway Television Network, going back many, many years when Susan Lee created that with other colleagues and started filming Broadway shows. And
Susan
then
Lee,
stopped.
really? I haven't heard that name in years. I remember
Susan is
Susan.
alive and well and developing new projects around the world. So yeah, but
Amazing.
even back then, there was the start of what was intended to be broadcast musical theatre, but it was ahead of its time, as many things that Susan creates are. So yeah, a little bit about me. So my background, I'm based in the UK, and my background is in running theatres and festivals in the UK. And over the last 10 years, developing the next generation of producers through master's programs and diploma programs. But most recently, I have been working partly with the Korean Arts Management Organization in terms of developing their producing talent. No, not creating, developing their producing talent, because their producing talent is phenomenal, but making connections for them with the UK market. And that continues hopefully for 2023 with a kind of bipartisan development, but also working in Saudi Arabia. And I'll happily talk more about that, where there is the creation of a completely new industry that just doesn't exist at the moment.
Yeah, that's a market that I don't know at all. So I'm interested in hearing about Saudi Arabia. Neil Gooding, where are you today? I think you're in New York today.
It's very much in New York.
If it's Friday, it must be New York, right?
Yeah, I'm in New York. So I've lived in New York for 3.5 years, pretty much full time, and then just disappear in and out. Hi to all the Aussies and New Zealanders on this call. I'm glad we're taking over everything. And apologies to whoever it was about my lack of voodoo skills. Otherwise, I would throw myself forward for your project. But yeah, I'm a producer and director that obviously did all my formative years in Australia and now lives in New York, but with projects sort of all varying scales between Australia, the UK, USA, and some that are coming up in South Korea, it looks like.
So let's get into a couple specifics. The projects that you're currently working on. I mean, I know that this whole panel, the overview is really global partnerships. Let's talk about what you're actually working on right now and the things that you're thinking about partnering on and what you've learned about the other markets that you find appealing, that you find interesting, and you think are good opportunities for you. Cody, what are you on right now? I mean, play-wise.
Yeah. I mean, we generally are working on about a dozen shows at a time. We have oh God, we have things coming up. A show we did off Broadway last year called Hip-Prov that launches a tour in 3 weeks and a sit-down production in Las Vegas in the spring. We have a out-of-town tryout of a new Pat Benatar musical called Invincible that we just ended that limited run right before the holidays, and a new John Doyle musical opening at Goodspeed in October.
What's the new John Doyle musical? I'm really interested.
It's called The 12, which is a musical that was around for a while with a different director and creative team that's now kind of being relaunched. It was at the Denver Center in 2011, I believe.
And what is it exactly that you've been doing in terms of your developing relationships in Korea? Why are you looking into that market and creating connections for yourself there?
It started out just by happenstance. I was producing a revival of Titanic that sadly COVID was our iceberg, and we were supposed to open during COVID on Broadway and didn't. But my producing partner on that happened to be a Korean producer. And that was kind of really my first introduction to the market, which is a very mature and robust, theater development pipeline over there. And Chris and I were there a couple of years ago over Thanksgiving and a week or so in November, meeting with kind of colleagues and learning how they develop musicals and what they're looking for and what they're looking to transfer over here versus us to transfer over there. And to be frank, developing work in any country outside of America, and especially outside of New York City, to me, one of the biggest selling points is it's incredibly less expensive. And there's just a lot fewer rules and regulations to follow that kind of give you more flexibility in doing what's right for the show, and not necessarily trying to shoehorn your show into one of 5 existing developmental agreements.
Well, let me ask you this: do you foresee projects, or do you have projects that you think would be particularly suited to the Korean market that you wouldn't necessarily want to do here? Or is it sort of a partnership that you're looking for that you can develop in Korea and also have a opportunity of bringing it into New York or an American audience?
Yeah, I mean, for me specifically, I'm looking for something that works here. So, that's not to say I wouldn't, as a consumer, as an audience member, want to see a Korean musical specifically for the Korean market. But I don't know that market. So it would be naive of me to believe that I could do a show over there for that market, in the same way that when I do shows in the UK, I'm generally partnering with a UK-based producer, and they're taking the lead because they know that market better than I ever will. So my kind of MO just for my business is developing a show that I can partner with a person in another market who knows that market well, and we can co-develop a show that we think will work in both of our markets.
So Neil, similar to you, question to you. What are the markets that you feel most comfortable about with? And do you agree with Cody that you seek partners who know the other markets better than you do? And where's your strength?
Yeah, definitely with some markets. I mean, I'm lucky because I've spent a fair bit of time in the UK and Australia, and now in New York. So certain phases of projects I feel comfortable doing in all of those markets. But also, I mean, like Cody was saying, I did a tally up the other day. I think I've got about 30 potential projects on the thing at the moment. And where
see Cody, you're an underachiever. He has 30.
Underachieving, Cody. But depending on what phase that's at, so some of those shows I'm working with writers from scratch on ideas. So that obviously in the early stages is driven by where the writers are for a little while. Some of those are, developing and at the point where we need to do readings and workshops. And for me at the moment, that makes much more sense to me to do in Australia or London than in the USA or New York. Then some of them are looking for their first outings in theaters. And again, on a cost level, London makes much more sense to me now than most of America. Some of them I'm co-producer on, where I'm not the driving force on that, like Back to the Future's coming over to Broadway. So that is at a level where they are, that depends on where's the audience that wants to see those shows. And then some of them are at a point where they exist, like I've got a show called Drummer Queens or The Empire Strips Back, and the partnership there becomes, now the show exists and has been successful in either Australia or the USA or England. There's a big wide world out there with a lot of cities, and some shows suit certain markets and doesn't suit other markets. And so where can we, look at touring those two? And that's definitely, I think, where you need partners. Like if you're looking at touring shows into markets that you don't know, and you're going into, arrangements with venues and their taxation systems, and that's where for me, I need partners that know the local market much better than I do.
So Chris, you don't actually have projects that you're working on, but you're working on developing relationships. You're a connector, really.
Yeah, and I think Cody so rightly said that the Korean market is incredibly developed. And just whilst we stay in Korea, it's just worth remembering that there are something like 120 theatres in the heart of Seoul that are developing shows, presenting shows all the time, in a space that's probably 3 or 4 blocks in New York.
Please leave your name, phone number, flashlight serial.
I'll just wait for the message to come in case it's a contract.
I found the person who had their mic on.
Fabulous. So it's an incredibly developed market. They have obviously K-pop is globally massive, and they are now starting what they call K-musical. And I want to go tangential for a second. What is it about K-pop that didn't work here, but it's such a global phenomenon? Do you have any thoughts on what?
Well, it would be like saying why rock and roll is huge. I've put a show on stage called Rock and Roll, but if I don't, that doesn't necessarily mean that that specific theatre show is going to tap into all the people that have loved rock and roll for 5 decades.
Yeah, we're talking about the art form of K-pop,
Yeah,
not the musical of K-pop. Really.
but it made me think of the musical K-pop.
Yeah, but it's what Ginny Kim, who's a Korean producer that Cody knows and Neil probably knows as well, who runs something called Theatre Bridge. What she and working with Katie Lipson in London have now started doing is to pick up 3 Korean written musicals which have global subjects, or the belief is they have global subjects, to showcase them in London, with the potential of then mounting them in London and seeing whether they have a global potential. And I think today's a really good time to reflect back on the extraordinary life of Sarah Schlesinger, who died very, very recently and headed up the NYU Tisch School course for so many years. Sarah nurtured and supported so many Korean writers at the Tisch School over the years. And those are now going on with an American sensitivity because they have spent 2 years sitting on Broadway, at the end of Broadway anyway. They have gone back to create global musicals. And I think anybody who's an emerging producer from anywhere in the world, it's worth looking at the larger landscape, which is obviously off Broadway, the fringe in the UK, like Edinburgh Festival and things like that, the Australian development market, but Korean especially. And
the Korean market, just to jump in there, Korea is an amazing market because I mean, they're sort of the history, as I understand it, is, and as an Australian, we have quite close ties because a lot of the earlier productions that were going through Asia were sort of Cats, and those are coming out with Australian cast and with the sets and costumes out of Australia. So their history was that, it was very much like the Cats and Les Mis, and like a show like Jekyll and Hyde is perennially, popular in Korea. And then they went through a phase, and at that stage, I don't think there was many local Korean musicals. Then the Daegu Music Festival was set up, where that was more of an international. What started as like this thing of like, we don't just need to bring Cats and Phantom to here. We want other smaller new musicals. Some came from Australia, some came from England, some came from the USA. But I think what that led to was an idea of like the depth and breadth of what musicals could be. And then, of course, it's a population that loves musicals and loves music and loves theatre. And it's a huge population, really. Yeah. I mean, their population base is staggering if you're an Australian. Like they have cities almost the population of Australia. And so then I think, there's some really, really big hits, like maybe Happy Ending, that is sort of, is aiming to come to New York now. But that's a hugely successful Korean musical that the rest of the world doesn't know exists. But it's fantastic, and it's been seen by millions and millions of people in Korea.
No, tell me if I'm right or wrong about this. My impression is that a lot that America, the American market, and also the UK markets feed a lot of product to Korea that they embrace and they love. But I don't think it's reciprocal. I don't think we get much product here, and I want to know what the reasons are for that. I have some thoughts about that.
That's just they are aware of that, and that's the reason for K musical. They are aware that the export import is has tended to be one way, and now they are realizing that they have this phenomenal talent base of producers, an amazing array of producers who know what they're doing and have produced massive Broadway shows for many years, and younger producers coming through who trained in New York and London. Plus they have writing talent. And what they now want to do is to find those global titles that have a universal appeal, and then look at how they can export those.
Okay, I'm going to throw this out a little bit too. I think culturally, there's been a little bit of a disparity between the British taste in theater and the American taste in theater. You can disagree with that, but I think it's basic. There's a basic truth in there somewhere. Can you kind of define what the difference is in terms of what succeeds and what makes a go of it in Britain versus what makes a go of it here, and how it happens that so many big hits from New York don't necessarily do well in Britain and vice versa? There's The
There's
markets seem
someone
different.
very famous who said, and I don't know who it was, that if I knew how to make a hit, then I'd make them all the time.
Right.
So,
I've said
but
that.
I do take your sentiment. I think we in the UK have a deeper love of the play and the drama, and you in USA have a deeper love of showbiz variety. And therefore, I think those are two differences. Plus, we don't have a great deal of, now that here I'm speaking personally, and I think slightly more personally, we don't have a great love of the period drama as a commercial entity here, whilst you love period drama, or seem to. So there are so many times I talk to a new musical writer who's writing something that's a classic book translated into lots of lovely frocks. And I go, that will play the American market incredibly well, but I'm not sure it will play the UK market. Now that's a specific area, but I do think we are very different. Yes.
Neil, this is the same question to you about Australia versus UK versus Broadway.
Well, Australia is a country that we largely import hit musicals. So that is and they tend to be from both. They're the hits from the UK and the USA. So that's sort of a harder one. There's always a debate about what the great Australian musical will be and how it's going to be written. And the idea that there is just one musical that's going to define Australia, I think is ridiculous. So Australia, I view Australia as being, in a sensibility, sort of right in the middle of the USA and the UK. Like we have, obviously we have English roots and, particularly someone like me, but a lot of our pop culture, I'm 46 now, a lot of my pop culture growing up was American. And the musicals that we got were a mix of, from my era, we lived through the Phantom, Les Mis, Cats, Starlight Express era, and then the American musicals, I guess, started taking more dominance with the Wickeds and the Jersey Boys and that stuff. So that in theatre terms, I think is in the middle. The big difference that I can identify between the USA and the UK, I think there's a sensibility where English audiences are more willing to want to go out and just have a good time and enjoy a show. And there's less snobbery for a show like Mamma Mia, or for, like if you look at something like Pretty Woman at the moment, did not succeed on Broadway and is doing very big business in the West End. And
there's so many stories like that.
Matilda or Groundhog Day, or that were way bigger hits in London than they were on Broadway, and I can't ever quite work out why that is. But particularly in regional UK, they're more likely to want to go and see Rock of Ages, Mamma Mia, and have a great time than to get another Sondheim touring around, where they probably. So there is some difference there in the way that, as a culture, they want to be entertained possibly more than be educated or moved. And that's a massive generalization. Of course, there's audiences for all sorts of genres in both countries, but as a general rule, there are shows that have very successful tours of the UK that you could not tour successfully around the USA. Now, also, that's partly economic. So the other thing I would say, the other end of that is, which sort of counters my argument, is, and Cody and I had a chat about this the other night, like I'm firmly of the belief, because of the economic structures in New York, that the epic plays and shows, and so in that I include Curious Incident, The Dog of the Nighttime, Leopoldstadt, Warhorse, all those kind of epic nights in the theatre, the Lehman trilogy that we've had, Ferryman that we've had recently that came to Broadway, I just don't even know how they would have started in New York. Like they needed to sort of have the economic model of England to exist on that scale. And then when they're uber successful, they can come into Broadway and sort of make it work for a season on Broadway. And
we all hear about casts of 25 and plays, and we scratch our head and go, huh? How do you do that? How do you do that?
But at the other end of it, the bigger worry for me in New York is I don't think Six would have been allowed to become what it became here. Like, I don't see how the economic model of something that goes from the Edinburgh Fringe to the Arts Theatre in London and grows into what it became. I don't know what that model is at the moment in the USA either. What's the pathway that allows that show just to find out what it is and keep growing and getting an audience?
The closest thing we have is a really smart developmental path that includes certain regional theaters. We have the regional theater development I think it's the only thing we have.
But that leaves out things like if you look at other shows that could have been like Six, like a Gutenberg the musical, or Who's Your Bag Daddy, just any of these smaller shows that pop up that run off Broadway for. I go, where's the world where they become Six? I can't see that here.
Cody, what do you think about this? First of all, do you think that there are things that need to be developed in London, or are more likely to be developed in London than they are here? And how well do products from the US translate into the British and vice versa, and also Australia? I mean, whatever you know, tell us what you know and what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I just think you have, producers willing to take more risks on shows. If, a workshop in New York for a musical is easily $250,000. It can be significantly more than that. I can do the exact same thing in the UK for $75,000. So, to me, I'm willing to take a risk on maybe an unknown writer and composer and kind of an, out of the box idea if it's $75,000. If I'm risking $250,000 to do a workshop of something, I'm probably going to take fewer risks. So that's the part that, I'm a little jealous of my colleagues overseas, and that I'm trying to combine forces with people to say maybe that's the world to develop the show in, and get it, right, and work on it and improve it, and then bring it to New York, where it's just so incredibly expensive to develop things.
Well, Randall is pointing out that what I mentioned is the Lord. I'm sorry, what?
Once you get past development, even like the next phase, like if you've got a smaller show, on my latest budgets, doing a small-ish show off Broadway, you will basically end up with the same capitalization of doing that same show on the West End in London. Now, of course, that comes down to, can you get theaters, blah, 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 how much is your marketing? But that's how disparate this is getting. Like to play for 4 weeks off Broadway, you can pretty much mount the show onto the West End if you can line up all the pieces properly.
One of the things that Randall was questioning by saying that the closest thing we have, and I mean I don't think it's the same. I think the closest thing we have is development in regional theaters, and he's saying that that drags on, and there are gatekeepers. It isn't. I know it's not the same. I think one of the things that UK has that we're not even talking about is government support of the arts. That's the big thing that's missing here. We have like nothing. Chris.
It's worth, I think, all the titles that you mentioned of those shows which have opened on Broadway, Lehman Trilogy, etc., are all came out of subsidized houses, all of which, whereby the initial production costs, all the development costs, everything else like that, have been funded by the UK government. And then if the show works, it transfers into the West End with commercial money going on. Then if it works, like War Horse and things, it goes way, way further. But all of that development hell was funded by the government, effectively.
Well, I don't think that's going to change for us now with the government we have right now. So I think we're still stuck in the same problem we've been in for a long time, which is that we do not have enough support of the arts for the arts to thrive in the way that they could thrive here. I agree with you, Chris. I don't think that a lot of the shows that you mentioned could have been developed here, or Neil, whoever said that. But
it's also worth remembering that for any writer anywhere in the world, and there are a lot of writers on this call, places like Edinburgh Festival Fringe and some of those places are amazing developmental showcases. I mean, there were 72 countries represented with shows at Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2019, which was the last sort of massive full year. And it's an extraordinary way of getting a show seen, as has been proved with Six. Doesn't happen very often, but Six is not unique. It is a pathway that can be taken by a small show.
So which one of you is working on a show called 12? So you're trying to be twice as successful.
Twice the cost.
I wanted to cover one other thing before we're going to go to questions, because there's a lot of questions in the chat that Owen's going to pull out and mention to us. And remember, everybody, if you have a question that you really want asked, start it with a Q so that we recognize it as a question. We haven't really talked very many specifics about the Saudi market that you're becoming educated about, Chris. I know that you're looking into it and you're just learning about it. What do you think the possibilities are there? What do you think a producer who's developing a new show, under what circumstances would the Saudi market be something you might want to consider?
Okay, I will happily talk endlessly about that market, because it's an area I'm spending a lot of time with at the moment. So at the moment, the Saudi market, or the Saudi government, is intent on developing its tourism infrastructure, its arts infrastructure, so that its reliance on the oil industry is obviously less great than it was. And there's something called Vision 2030, which is the development of cities and arts infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm working with the Ministry of Culture on the development of the talent pool that might be necessary for the development of an arts industry, which doesn't exist really at the moment. And so I'm working at the moment with aspiring musical theatre performers, and how do you train those? Where might they train when they want to go into full-scale training? We're looking at developing a writing program, which I'm working on at the moment, and we're working on developing designers and directors, because at the moment, what happens is that most shows that appear in the Middle East are effectively flying in and flying out and bringing everything with them. So Cirque du Soleil will fly in with however many trucks or planes or whatever it takes, build themselves up, mount their show, and fly out again, leaving, in a sense, no talent development whilst it's happening. And what the Saudi government is determined to do, in a sense, is to develop the talent in the kingdom, so that less has to be flown in and more can be developed from internally. And there are lots of conversations going on. There are various Broadway producers who are in discussion about potentially mounting shows in Arabic in the kingdom. There are conversations happening across various parts of the Arab world. And my work is in terms of developing the very early stages of the talent that might perform in it. It's starting from nothing. Music hasn't been taught in schools for 40 years, 50 years. There is no drama. There are no theatres. There is passion, but people haven't been able to dance until a few years ago.
What I'm curious about is how does our art translate into their culture? Do you think that there's an audience that's willing to embrace it, that they're willing to acclimatize themselves to what it is that we do?
Well, why should they acclimatize themselves to what you do specifically? But I do think there are universal subjects that can potentially work across the globe. So yes, it's a culture, it's a tribe of languages, a whole group of communities who have no concept of West Side Story. They haven't, not a single person, I don't think, in the workshops I was running last summer had ever heard of West Side Story. Why should they have done? They've never left the kingdom, and it hasn't been on their radar. For some of them, for many of them, they've never heard of Romeo and Juliet. Again, why should they have done? But there are extraordinary stories that they do know, and there are extraordinary stories to be developed there. And there are as many Arabic-speaking people across the world as there are the population of the USA. So there is a market there to be thought about. And one of the things I think we all know is that there is quite a lot of money in Saudi Arabia. So the potential to develop infrastructure with the Ministry of Culture and others, and to develop opportunities is there. The two big challenges, three. There's a need to develop the talent pool. There's a need to develop the infrastructure of the buildings in the kingdom, which is happening slowly. But there's also a need, most importantly, to develop the audience, because that audience is not used to going to the theatre.
Right. And some subject matter might be limited, I would think.
Yeah,
we have a lot of interesting comments in the chat about that. Like Emma Goldman saying that she's not sure that her play "Fucked" would be embraced
I think, we are working still with a regime that is has a lot of challenges to it. The individual human beings that I've been working with over the last summer, and will be working, I hope, again this summer, are passionate, inspiring folk who love musical theatre and have found their tribe effectively by having these opportunities. But we're working within a censorship world. We're working where you're not going to get a pint of lager in the interval. And we're working where it is illegal to express homosexuality. So there's a lot of work to be done yet. I, as a mere mortal over there, can't change the Saudi regime, but I can help aspiring performers to find their voice.
And it's also possible to find product that you think would resonate there. I mean, it's just a lot of it's common sense, and sensitivity to the culture.
Yeah, but that also, I mean, even that's complicated, and this is a global. This is so going back 15 years, I was working on the original production of Dirty Dancing in Australia, and when that became a hit there, I somehow ended up charged with the job of doing phone calls to most of the theatre venues in Asia and trying to get through the language barriers about whether there's a market in there. And of course, at that point, you go, well, there is in Singapore, and there is in, at that point, Korea had sort of matured enough that there was, at that point, there was basically no Western theatre in China. There's no infrastructure for theatre in India. And then I won't name the countries, but there's other countries where you go, well, Dirty Dancing is hardly a hard-hitting show, but you go, the dancers are wearing leotards a lot of the night, or some of them, and that is an issue. So you've got to think about costumes, you've got to think about the way women are represented. That Dirty Dancing has an abortion storyline that was problematic. So you do have to carefully look at every element of your show. Some shows can go globally instantly, and some can't, and some can go to this country, not the country next door. And it's just something you need to, and that's where you do need good advice too from locals, and also just dealing with theatre owners and dealing with local, authorities and just all those things. It becomes very complicated very quickly.
Cody, are there any product in particular that you were thinking about partnering with in Korea, or is this just an initial meetings stage where you're trying to forge some partnerships that might come through later?
Both. I've done several co-productions in Korea. There's several more on the drawing board, but it's not like that's a market I'm specifically looking for. I'm looking for great storytellers and smart business people, no matter where they are. And kind of the added bonus is if we can develop it in their backyard and save some money, that's better for the project.
Oh, and be the voice of God. Let's catch up on the questions from the room, because there's
yes, we have a lot of questions, which is great. All right, I want to start.
Go back to Michelle.
Yep, that's where I was going to start. Michelle wants to know, and this was kind of answered by Chris in the chat, but if you were to mount a production in South Korea, would you then be expected to translate your show?
I mean, most of the American imported musicals are now translated into Korean.
But not by the author. No, Michelle, you're not responsible for translating into a language that you don't speak.
I mean, the author is very involved and has word for word approval. So it's a fascinating process in that you work with a local book writer who's trying to translate not a verbatim, word for word translation, but to get the emotion and the feeling across. But then the US based author will get a reverse translation back of the Korean book translated back into English so they can kind of understand what the story is. It's truly a fascinating process.
And I'm doing two projects at the moment where the process is we go in with an English speaking cast and the original production. We do that for 6 weeks, 8 weeks with that cast. And then we train locals and they do the translations. And then we leave a locally based Korean language production of that same show in the country. That's a fascinating model to me.
Owen, next question.
Great. We have a question from Emma. Emma asks, does the South Korean market like plays too, or are they also largely musicals?
They do like plays, yes. And they're quite a musical heavy market, but there are plays. And indeed, a couple of years ago, they brought to Edinburgh Festival one of the most famous plays. It's just a two-hander from the Korean market. And they brought a Korean cast and then ran it in repertoire with a Scottish cast playing it in English. So there was an opportunity for the audience in Edinburgh Festival to see both the Korean play done in Korean with surtitles and the Korean play done in English with Korean surtitles. So there's a lot of that kind of crossing over beginning to happen.
So they do use surtitles, and it's not.
I think it's worth mentioning, right, that it should not be a surprise to anybody in 10 years when Korean musicals are hugely popular, because you go, K-pop has been hugely popular to a large number of people, just not in the, in America or Australia or the UK, or very few that knew about it. And now it's broken out into more what I'd call pop culture. And in the last few years, between Minari and oh gosh, what was the like Squid Game? Yeah, that style of film and television has been made for decades, and has been hugely popular to hundreds of millions of people. It's just that the UK and the USA are slowly catching up. So I honestly, it would be very strange if their musical theatre, with the quality of the people that are there and the amount of skill and knowledge and passion they have, does not follow a similar pathway.
And it's worth just remembering that the Koreans came to NAMT, National Alliance of Musical Theatre in New York, back in 2008, I think it was, 7 or 8, with a catalogue of titles that they wanted to see whether the American producers would be interested in developing.
And didn't the Koreans pick up a show called Sunfish out of that NAMT season?
Possible, yes.
Yeah, because that was the show that started it true, and I remember that.
Yeah.
They were brought from NAMT. They were brought to Korea.
Yeah. And
But
so many of the
were
big,
completely mad.
They would have
so
gone
many
to
of
the
the big.
festival.
I'm sorry, what was that, Neil?
They probably went to the Daegu. There was a process that camp went down there, and it was showed. I think there was a phase where shows were getting picked up from festivals and taken to that Daegu Music Theatre Festival.
Yeah,
That sounds right.
So many Korean producers are also film and TV producers, right? CJ, E&M, the library companies, some of the big producers in Seoul, the same people and companies are producing huge, blockbuster films in Korea, some of which have, become hits in the UK and the US as well.
and let's just not forget the Japanese market as well, because Toho and Shiki have been linked to major international titles since 1981, whenever, Cats. And they're also developing, they have massive development houses for the development of new work. So the Japanese market is also enormous.
Owen, what's
Great.
next?
We have a couple of questions relating to how do writers in the US find support in the UK and elsewhere?
You probably need to go there and meet people. But what I would say about the UK is there is a program called Stage One that's run by SALT. And the UK is filled with, I'm going to say 100, I'm guessing, but of the smartest, most eager young producers and creative producers that I have met. They're so exciting to talk to. So they, like I said, their barrier to entry in terms of doing workshops or putting shows into quite major theaters is so much lower than here. So the way I describe the difference is the UK is filled with smart young creative producers, and the USA is filled with what we call co-producers, which are basically fundraising investors. Fundraising investors are very unlikely to be driving the next wave of new shows. That's going to be the creative producers.
We
And
also
by the way, Chris, thanks to your introduction, we have Louis Harthorn coming to speak with us in a couple of weeks. So, and he's bringing immersive theater to New York from London. So this conversation is going to have a follow up.
But I think the other thing is that we have a regional theatre network that is always developing new work. It has some support from local authorities, county councils, and from the government, and it is always developing new work. And most or many of the West End shows either come from the major subsidised houses, i.e. the National Theatre or the RSC, or they come having been started in one of the regional houses. The artistic directors of those regional houses are best mates with, because they grew up with, the people who are now in Stage One, things like that. There's also a couple of producing courses. So there's the Mount View Theatre School in London course that I started some years ago, and Corey Reynolds knows it very well. He's on this call today. And so that course has developed and created people who are now moving to being executive directors in theatres. And the diploma course that I run at the moment, again, 23 producers coming out of that over COVID. So there's a lot, as you say, of extraordinary talent out there looking for product. Where do they look? Some come to NAMPT, absolutely. Almost all of them go to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe to explore. And if you remember that there's kind of something like 3,500 shows at Edinburgh Festival Fringe, around about 2,000 performances a day. So there's a lot of stuff there for them to have a look at. So if a writer is really interested in getting a foothold into the UK market, one thing to do would be come to Edinburgh in August, just as a punter, explore the landscape, go away again, raise a bit of money, because you'll lose it in Edinburgh, and then come back and mount a show in Edinburgh and shout loudly from the rafters.
And just to clarify what I said before about then the barrier to entry. So let's take Six again. And look, Six is an outlier. Let's not pretend that's normal life, but it exists. So that scene in Edinburgh Fringe and Andy Barnes and Kenny Wax, the next step of that is it goes to the Arts Theatre in London, which is viewed as, it's right in the centre of London. It's viewed basically as a West End theatre in a lot of ways. The cost of them. So if I found a show at the Edinburgh Fringe that I love, and I go, I want to put this off Broadway or on Broadway, I am raising millions of US dollars to do that process. That is not what it cost to do Six in its next phase at the Arts Theatre. And that's that problematic gap that I'm talking about. Like, even if you find something you love at Edinburgh, the idea that you're going to bring that straight to New York is such a financial risk that there has to be a better way of doing it.
And they very wisely took it. So Andy and Kenny very wisely then took it back to Edinburgh, having zhuzhed it up a bit and put some lovely frocks with it and made it look sexy as hell. They took it back to Edinburgh, played it again in Edinburgh. In theory, it was never going to go after that, but they'd already booked the tour that would happen after Edinburgh. So they were playing very, very canny things. The other thing that they did, which I'm so sad New York won't allow, is they set up a system whereby the audience was invited at the end of the performance to film the show. And there was a mega mix at the end, and the audience was invited to film the show. So every single night at that Arts Theatre and in Edinburgh, there were 200 to 500, depending on the size of the space, marketing officers working for them, filming the show and putting it out on YouTube. All the rights holders were happy with it. It happens in London, it happens in almost every other country in the world, but it can't happen on Broadway because the unions won't allow it. And you go, that is really killing a wonderful marketing opportunity. Feels mad to me. So I'm just a punter with a feeling. You as union members may feel it's absolutely right that they shouldn't be allowed to film. I don't know.
Okay, Owen, next up.
Next question. This is about work permits. Do we need a work permit to get our works produced in a country that isn't our own? So UK, Australia, South Korea?
If you're the author, you're not an employee, right? You're an artist bringing a work there that other laborers are doing. So generally no. But if you're an actor or a director, someone like that, yes.
Okay, next.
Great. This is kind of a combined question. Helen and I both want to know how, when you're working with countries in the Middle East where there are restrictions on story content, and that may stand at odds with much of what theater is about, especially in regards to LGBTQ plus persecution. How do you reckon with that? Is that just something you have to compartmentalize, or is that something that you are keeping in mind as you are working with this?
I keep it in mind all the time, but I'm also trying to make gentle movement that is only possible if we're there to do it. So we were a mixed bag of all those letters, or almost all those letters of LGBTQI who were present in the kingdom making work. But we were very careful that we were not asking the people we were working with anything to do with their sexuality, because that would be a conversation that would be dangerous for those people to have. at this moment. That will change over time. So yes, we have it in mind all the time. And some of the creatives that I would have loved to have taken with me felt that it was not a risk it was a risk for themselves and not something they wish to do. In terms of the subject matters that we're working with, yes, we are very aware that there are many subjects which we can't tackle. I mean, outward shows of affection between anybody is at the moment prohibited. So you can't have snogging on stage between anybody, really. So the choice of well, you can with animals. So a couple of squirrels can kiss, that's fine, nobody minds that. So there is an element of anthropomorphized theatre that I think might work quite well. But yes, we're being very careful and testing our own feelings about it as we're moving forward.
By the way, Snogging on Stage would be a great title for a musical.
Particularly with animals.
Yeah.
RK Green has a question. Given the expense of live development, how are producers using other media? How are you using other media for development? Are you in fact using it?
Yeah, I am. And obviously, musicals still have the trickiness of how to deal with lag for music. But to be honest, in the early stages of shows, and particularly now where I've got a director in the USA and writers in Australia, there is a phase where you always sit around like in a room or at someone's house. That early phase in particular, where you're just doing the basics of like character plotting and storyboarding and first reads, and you can play tracks and hear the song, that I'm finding can be pretty successfully done on Zoom. And then there's a point, of course, where you need to be in a room. There's no real substitute for that at some point in the process. But the early phases means you can be way more international without flying people around the world and get fairly similar results, I'm finding early on.
Linda Rubin comments along these lines. She recently came back from a week in Saudi Arabia, talked with someone from the American consulate and someone in the Public Investment Fund, got the impression that they are years away from our kind of theater. Right now, they are very open to education of their students. Workshop, they're doing something with USC Film School. Does that jive with what you're experiences?
Yeah, I mean, that they are doing a phenomenal amount of education. And at the moment, there are hundreds of thousands of postgrad students, graduate, undergrad and postgrad students from Saudi who are in universities all over the USA and all over the UK, mainly studying engineering and accounting and stuff like that. But in time, that will move to the arts as well, I think. And yes, there's a lot of training programs. There's training programs being operated by a couple of lovely guys from Florida who are teaching directing. There's lots of training programs. There's no income tax payable in Saudi, and all courses are free. So the financial models are very different. But yeah,
Okay.
It's training and it will take time.
Anecdotally, I know a couple of years ago, there was also a program with Israel where they were training Israeli artists in musical theater. I don't know if anybody knows anything about that, but I remember we talked about that once. And who's next?
Next up, Michelle wanted to know, someone mentioned the importance of fringe festivals. For these events, can you cast from local talent?
In an ideal world, you'd probably need, this is the mistake that I see a lot of Americans making, is that obviously the economics of the UK work better, but not if you're going to fly an entire creative team and all your actors and stuff from America. So fringe festivals, it depends what your show is. If it's new and you can rehearse it there for 3 weeks leading up to it. I mean, a lot of fringe shows, particularly coming from Australia, they exist, they have a cast, and people are going there to be in the shop window for global producers to look at. So that comes down to a show by show basis. But I would say for developing, if you're going to develop work in London, use English people. They've got great lighting designers, they've got great set designers, they've got great choreographers. Take your writers if that's who you need to take, but don't take an entire American team unless the show is way down the pathway. But then I would question whether the economics of it are actually better or not.
And there are examples of, for example, there's a piece called Mother's Song, which was developed by two British writers, but with one of the universities in Chicago and the Royal Conservatoire. That had an American cast and a British cast playing in Edinburgh. And then it came over and was developed in Chicago, and it's now having its next outing in the UK. So there is crossover happening quite often with postgrad student actors as well.
By the way, can anybody hear the dog barking in the background here? I guess not. Okay, good. Let's see.
Nancy wants to know about if anyone has explored India and Bollywood musicals. Is there any experience looking into that market?
Yeah,
I'm sure there is. I don't have experience there though.
A couple of the biggest Bollywood producers came to the UK about 7 or 8 years ago, looking to produce a Bollywood musical in London as a showcase. But they did choose the London Palladium as the place to do it. So probably one of our most prestigious places. And a producer called Guy Chapp, based in the UK, produced that for them. And it had 2 seasons. So it was big Bollywood producers and UK partner putting this on just to develop that market. And now within the UK, there are a number of Bollywood musicals being written by UK and Indian writers working together.
Chris, you get kudos from Kevin. You're working this developmental, producing your legendary.
There is Come Fall in Love, which is aiming for Broadway as well, which is a Bollywood, musical. And Bollywood Dreams, written by Angela Weber, which I don't know if that was a Bollywood musical.
Bombay Dreams. You mean the Bombay Dreams musical? Bombay Dreams.
Bombay Dreams. Yeah.
Are we talking about Bombay Dreams, the musical that played in London and also came to New York, but didn't do as well in New York?
Yeah,
that was Andrew Lloyd Webber's attempt at it, but there's a genuine, a more authentic Bollywood musical aiming for New York at the moment.
Oh, okay. Gosh, we got so many.
There's still a lot. Catherine wants to know, do you find solo shows are much cheaper even off Broadway? I'm sure it depends on the production design, etc.
I mean, certainly they're going to be less, but there's kind of a cost to entry. You can't really do an off-Broadway show for less than about 400,000, whether you have 1 person or 6 people. So yes, it will save you money, but not, it's not going to be 1/10 of the cost of a bigger show.
And I guess, Catherine, to answer, I know you're from New Zealand. The answer is you could do it in New Zealand for 1/10 of the cost of doing it in New York. It's cheaper than doing a musical in New York, but it's still expensive compared to what it should cost to do that show.
Well, Cody, you did a remarkable job on Regina Comet last year for a pittance. You produced
that was only because we were the first new show to reopen after the COVID shutdown, and I called in every favor under the sun. That was a once in a career low budget show.
I was stunned when I heard how little that cost for you. Owen, catch us up.
Yep.
Guys, does anybody have a hard out? Let me know if you need to leave.
I have at least another 5 or so minutes.
Okay.
Cool. Daryl wants to know what the purpose of international producers wanting to bring their productions into New York if it's so expensive to do so here.
Oh, this is where you can make money. Branding, and we talk about how low the costs are in the West End. Ticket prices are also lower there, and grosses are also lower. Wicked as a New York entity, I think, is at the $1.7 billion just from the Broadway company. So the expense is tremendous, but the upside is bigger than anywhere in the world.
And also it's the prestige, right? So like, if you look at Wicked, everyone knows Wicked even before it had ever left New York. And so all of your US touring, your UK touring, your West End production, your Australian production, your Asian productions, your high schools, your amateur companies, they all do that because it was branded as a Broadway hit. And that's kind of what you're doing it for. Now, again, I'm going to reference Six. I'm getting very boring on Six tonight, but Six to me should be the warning shot to everybody that the model is changing, because Six did not need to come to Broadway to be a hit. It was a hit long before it came to. So the old model of you open in New York, you take this massive risk, and then if you're successful, you filter out to the world. Six has completely reversed that and gone. It was on cruise ships before it came to Broadway. So I think it's more likely that we're going to see that model breaking down a bit more because of the cost barrier. It will always be New York. New York is Broadway, and that's why we all live here. We love it, and it's always been the focus. But I don't know. There's other models popping up that are making shows more economic hits before they get here, I guess.
Catherine asks a really tricky, sensitive question, which she gets that gay content, LGBTQ content is taboo in these other markets, but would she, as a gay woman, going there as an artist, have any problems?
All I can say is that we had a non-binary gay, male and female gay, and bisexual participants with us this visit, and absolutely no problem at all. We were not overtly sexual, of course, but no one questioned us. And the interesting thing is that the part of the censor checking in Saudi is that if you are going to go there and work, you do have to supply them with a list of your Facebook address, your Instagram address, things like that, so that someone in the system can check you. And if anybody looks on my website, they will know full well that I'm covering many bases and very out there. And my blogs talk about it and everything else. I don't think they're interested in that at all. The censor is really checking that you're not, in a sense, seditious, I suppose is the word for it. So no, each person has to make their own choices, but I don't think you'd be at risk by having a partner who is same-sex partner, and by telling people that your husband or wife is the same sex as you are.
Oh man, we have so many questions. RK wants to know whether there are any precautions that need to be taken to protect intellectual property in international markets, especially China and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Okay. So it's a concern that you have to be aware of. Well,
I think Witches of Eastwick is still running in Russia after the license finished. When did I leave Cameron's? 2007. The license finished in 2006. As far as I know, the production's still out there. So yes, certain countries, certain practitioners within certain countries do not necessarily understand or choose not to understand licensing or copyright.
Or certain churches within the USA that want to do Hamilton.
Want to do Hamilton here? Okay, good. That's good. Paul Smith, his play Love and Plunder is set in the old. And take it. You do it.
Yeah, all right. So Paul's question regarding the Saudi market. My play Love and Plunder is set on the old Saudi Jewish kingdom of Khaybar, where Muhammad raided it and saw a woman he liked kill her husband and took this Jewish lady as his wife. Would there be a market in Saudi Arabia for this?
I think it might need a couple of years yet, by the sound of it, just from your flyer description. But who knows? I was told I was being far too careful and sensitive when I was there last year by some of the practitioners we're working with. So there's nothing to stop you exploring that.
Oh, I think
I think Corey has a question or I don't know if that's a question. I don't quite understand it. So Corey, if you have something that you'd like to ask, feel free to turn on your mic and chime in. Never mind, just a comment.
Oh, no.
All right.
Okay. So I think we've covered a lot. Obviously, there's more to talk about. There's always more to talk about, but sometimes you just have to stop. So sometimes you have to go get dinner. So thank you guys. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Cody. And thanks, Neil, for being with us today. I'm very grateful for your friendship and grateful for your support always. And thanks to everybody in the room. And I'm just going to go do a little wind up to my YouTube viewers and also to our podcast listeners. If you want to be part of the conversation, if you want to ask questions and be in the room, don't let me stop you. just email me. Just email trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and we'll send you the Zoom link and you can come join us. And if you're not able to come at 5 o'clock on Fridays, we do run this on YouTube, and we do run this in a distributed podcast called Truth Talks About Theater. So we should be pretty easy to find. We also do this as a community service. So from this very start, we always made pay what you can the way to go with this. Pay what you can really should be pay what you can if you can, something. Most people come here for free, and that's fine. We appreciate the community. We love having people here. But this is also a time of, we're still continuing our year-end campaign to raise money to go into 2023. And although it's past December 31st, we can still benefit from your donations if you want to donate and help us. That would be TRUDonate, trudonate.com. That's trudonate.com. Do support the work that we do and help us keep doing it. Always feel free to email me with suggestions of topics and speakers that you'd like to hear. I'll bring in people upon request. I've done that many times. And join us in the weeks to come. That's it. I guess we're just gonna say goodnight to everyone, and or good afternoon, whatever time it is for you. And thank you for being with us, and hope to see you again.